Okay, guys, so we're going to start. This is typically what I would do. For all our assignments. So just a little housekeeping here really quick. The assignment sheet's going around. Please make sure you get on it. People are, and I appreciate this, people are like absolutely paranoid that they have to get their homework that's due today in like before this class starts. You really don't. You just need to get it in today. The truth of the matter is that it's never late until I grade it, and I'm not going to grade your stuff. I don't ever grade assignments the day they get turned in. So you have today to get it in. Is that okay? So don't freak out about that part. The other thing that I do typically do in this class, certainly when it applies, is that I like to take a look at work that was turned in. So you'll see, we'll get into a bit of a rhythm that you'll turn your work in. So for instance, you got assigned for week number 3, the assignment was to actually do the Sunny assignment. That's something you're going to turn in today. I will grade it over the course of next week, and we will look then next week at examples of Sunny that you guys turned in and take a look and see what was good and what was bad, what worked, what didn't work, all that kind of stuff, right? So and that just continues on through the rest of the semester. So just so that you know that you can expect that. There is a downside to this. The downside is the people whose names begin early in the alphabet, because typically when I go through and I'm grading the assignments, I'm actually making notes. And as soon as I find something that's what I consider to be a common issue or a common problem that a lot of people are having, I will simply take that as an example to show you guys. So it usually means that the people whose names begin with A, B, C, D are always getting their work shown, both good and bad. So I apologize to you guys from the very beginning. I'm not singling anyone out here to make them feel bad. It's just like, boom, okay, there is a problem in one of the first or second people that I looked at that's going to be common to everyone, and that's just the one that I show. So do not feel picked on Michelle, do not feel picked on because you're really early in the game. So anyway, I'm just going to throw that one out there. Nolan, you don't have anything to worry about because you're at the other end of it all. So not to say that you don't have anything to worry about. Again, a lot of times I will get all the way through, but the whole process of this, the purpose of this is to, again, show these common issues that are actually coming up. They're not to humiliate anyone. They're not to embarrass anybody. All in all, so far, this class has started out pretty good. I'm very encouraged by that part of it. So you can congratulate yourselves for all of that. How did Sunny go? Challenge, isn't it? Yeah. But those are the good things. Those are the good things. So again, what we will do is we will actually do Sunny in class next week. So, but for me, having you to experience this, we had gone over a number of strategies for making selections, and then I was hoping that you would use a variety of those strategies on Sunny. Some are more successful at doing certain things than others. So at any rate, that was kind of the idea, the reason behind that. I think that causes a more ingrained learning experience than for me to simply show you how to do everything and have you do it in class. That gets boring. This is meant to challenge you and your creative approach to stuff. So that's kind of the game we're playing here and will be for the whole rest of the semester. So with that being said, I do want to take a look only at a couple of ones that we had going on here. We are pretty much like I just explained to you, we are going to do the parametric dodge and burning of the girl in class today. So you'll get some sense of pretty much what I'm actually talking about. But I do want to go over a couple of things first. And just to show you the couple of things that I thought were done well, a couple of things that I had a question about. So I want to show you Holly's first, and in her case, this stuff, so this was the DNG, make the DNG profile part. And you can see in her drop-down menu right here that she has created the profile, at least one of them. But this is the canned name that comes up when you go to make a profile. It's actually the profile. They're basing it off of the metadata. You can see the metadata right here. It knows that it was a Canon EOS 5D Mark II, and so that's what it offers to name the profile. However, if I had two Canon 5DS Mark IIs, which one would this be? Which camera body would this be? Because they're not the same. More importantly, this discounts any of the lighting that is having an impact on that profile. So you can see here for this particular shot, she's got this profile and she's actually used it, and that part was fine. However, if I cancel out of here and go take a look at a different one of hers, it gives me the exact same profile name. And those two profiles, even though if they're shot with the same camera, they are extremely closely related, they are not indeed exactly related because of the light that's actually, the difference in the light. This is strobe that's on the inside of a building, and the other was available light, daylight. So again, two different animals. You should make your profiles as specific as you possibly can make them. So I just wanted to point that out. And in Michelle's, and this a lot, again, this is just what I prefaced earlier and said, a lot of people ended up doing this. So I would say at least half, if not more, of the class did this. Hang on, let me cancel out of that part. So this is Michelle's. This is the parametric dodge and burn of the girl in the part right here. So actually, I take that back. This was not hers. In this case, Michelle had actually made the custom profile, but then when it came time to actually develop this file out, let me see if that's, yeah, this is the file right here. She didn't use the profile that she had made earlier or do the color balance for that, although this color balance is way off on what it should be. And again, more than half the class did the exact same thing. You either didn't use a profile or you didn't embed a profile, which is what I'm going to show you next. So this is Kennedy's. And again, this was the parametric dodging and burning one, the one that went ahead and got made. And if I double click on this to go into Camera Raw and take a look at it, you can see this little warning symbol right here. So we had this conversation last week, or at least the week before. I know we brought this up before. So what happens is that when you create your camera profiles, they get placed into a folder on your system. And as long as you are working on your computer understands that that's where they are and understands there's a link between your this PSD file and that camera profile that sits in the camera profile folder that's buried so deep inside of your user library. And as long as you are on your computer, it can make a call to that and it's fine, everything's great. But when she turned the assignment in to me and I'm now looking at it on my computer, I don't have that. That profile does not live in my camera profile, the profiles file folder in my user library. So you get this warning message, this little yellow triangle comes up. And even worse, it comes up saying that the profile is not, again, the profile is not installed. The rendering of this is now incorrect. It means that it's actually doing more damage than good because now it's guessing. Now, Adobe has never really said this. I'm sure somewhere in the literature they would say this. My sense is that they are actually returning this to the Adobe standard. But if we take a look at it, we can see, yeah, it doesn't seem to be much of a change there. So my guess is that it defaults back to the Adobe standard, which is, again, not the end of the world, but it defeats the whole purpose of doing these profiles. So I just wanted to point that part out. I'm going to cancel out of this part. We are going to talk again when we do this about certain parameters that exist in this. When I look at this file for me, and I'm actually tracking a set of numbers here, I feel like that the skin tones are too dark. When I'm looking at the shirt itself, the shadow detail area of this is actually really pretty good. So there's a number of things that I just want to point out to you guys that we're going to talk about, because some of these are actually better done than others. So I'm going to close this up. I want to show you one more here really quickly, and then we will actually move on this. I want to show you Jackson's. This I actually thought was pretty well done. So when I'm looking around specifically at numbers, and again, we will get to what those numbers are. So I'm taking a look around those. They seem to be really a good solid number for me. I'm going to open up his. You can see that he actually has the embedded profiles that are in here. So you can see, even though it starts out with that Canon EOS 5D Mark II, it does have the unique code for the file shooting that this was from. So this is indeed the custom profile that was created for this shooting. I can also see that he does have his custom profile. His custom white balance has actually been done as opposed to this reading as shot. That's what that would look like. So anyway, I like to show the sort of the good examples as well as the possibly not so good examples. So I'm going to close this up. I'm going to start on something completely different though, because this happened to me, to you guys last week or the week before. I was hoping to reset your Camera Raw defaults, and I took a look at it, and again, the way you used to be able to do this in Photoshop inside of Camera Raw up until the very, well, it's not the version of Photoshop that you have right now. If you're on 2022, it changed in 2021, which was the version I was working with last week. So I want to show you how to, again, reconfigure. Remember, we were talking about chromatic aberration and using lens profiles on here to, to correct for issues that you might have with any given particular lens. They've completely moved how you do this in Photoshop in Camera Raw. And I went in, found out how to actually do the changes, whatever, and I want to show you that part right now. So we're going to start with a file that you probably have not worked with yet. So, and it goes back a little bit. So if you can go to your assignment folders for this class, and I think it's going to be in class number 2. Let me check here just to make sure. Yeah, it is in class number 2. It's not inside of your assignment folder. It's inside of this folder that it says 201003227_ver_woods. It's this folder right here. This is the one that I want you to get in. Now, I don't know how many, are you guys able to actually find that folder? Yep. How many files do you have inside that folder? How many files do you have inside that folder? 6? Fuck. Okay, sorry. I really only want the CR2 files. There should only be 2 of them. So just again, look at the extension, select the CR2, and then the first one, it's frame number 1, and then there's another one for frame number 2. If you hold down your Command or Control key on your keyboard, you can actually do discontinuous selections, which means you can have blank ones in between. But I want you to select both of the CR2 files at the same time. And the reason this is important is we want to bring them into Camera Raw at the same time, and if you don't do them, if you don't launch them at the same time, there's no way to get, once you get one of these open into Camera Raw, there's no way to add another one to it while you're actually in Camera Raw. So with both of these selected, just Command O to actually open this up, or drag the file down onto Photoshop. Now for me, I have reset my, I just updated to the latest version of Photoshop today. I personally don't like the thumbnails on the side over here, but we will deal with that part in just a second. What I do want to do is this, and we've talked about this before, and I think this is why Photoshop, or why Adobe actually changed how you do this process. It used to be that you could actually go in here and make any changes that you want. So for instance, we could change the white balance, and we could change contrast and exposure and all that kind of stuff, whatever. And then you could create a new default. And then with that new default, every single time you would open any file in Photoshop, didn't matter what it was, any file from any shooting into Camera Raw, it would use those presets. And that caused people a lot of problems, because if you inadvertently had said, oh yeah, to correct this I need to add a full stop of exposure, then that full stop of exposure, that +1 exposure, got built into your defaults for Camera Raw, and every time you opened a file in Camera Raw, it had that extra full stop of exposure added to it. So Photoshop kind of put training wheels on this to make this happen. So it used to be you could come over here and you could click on these little 3 menus right here, and now you still have an option to reset this to its default, so which we can actually do right now, and you'll see your image actually changes. It gets rid of any white balance that's been done on it. You can see the white balance is no longer custom, it's listed as shot. The profile that it gives you is camera landscape. I have no idea why that is. Again, it should be Adobe standard unless I have made a custom profile for this. So that part, again, that simply is what it is. However, if we scroll down, so I want you to scroll down to the palettes, down to the bottom where it has optics, and you actually open up the optics. Inside of the optics, once we get this open, you will see that there are 2 options in here. One is to remove chromatic aberration, and the other is to use profile corrections. And what these profile corrections are, you'll see that there's a little drop down arrow next to it. They're basically lens corrections. And so in this one, mine is enabled. It's actually turned on because of the way I've got my Photoshop set up. We're going to change yours in just a second. If you turn off, we're going to start, forget the chromatic aberration one right now. I want to start with using the profile correction. If you turn this off, you can actually see a fundamental shift happens in your image. So if you turn it on and off, with it turned on, what appears to happen is, it appears that either, this is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It either appears that the center of the image is moving away from you and the edges are moving towards you, or just the opposite. But nonetheless, what the trick to this is, it's appearing that the edges of your of the image are actually becoming closer to you, and that the center of the girl, really where the card is, whatever, is receding deeper into space. This is caused by, again, the particular lens that I'm using for this. You can see it right over here. Again, Photoshop picks this up from the metadata. It knows that this raw file was shot with a Canon 24-70 f/2 zoom lens. It understands that lens. This is a profile that was created by Adobe to fix the inherent problems of that lens. Now, lenses have 2 problems. Actually, they have 3 problems total. But the distortion is usually in 2 manifestations. One is called barrel distortion. And what barrel distortion is that if you imagine that you take an image and you, so imagine there's literally a barrel in front of you, and you take an image and you wrap it on the barrel. You will, if that happens, you will notice that the center of the image appears to be coming more towards you, and the edges of the image appear to be receding away from you. So that's barrel distortion. The inverse of that, the opposite of that, is called pin cushioning. And in pin cushioning, what happens is the center of the image appears to be receding away from you, whereas the edges appear to be coming closer to you. They are simply the opposites of one another. So if you have an image that has barrel distortion, which this one does have, they apply pin cushioning to it. And so that's what's going on. If you, again, turn this off, you'll see that the center is closer, appears to be closer to your camera. And then when you click on it, it actually gets pushed back. So they are applying pin cushioning to do this. They're also taking care, so those are the 2 problems of distortion, pin cushioning, barrel distortion. The other part is vignetting. And then, especially with wide angle lenses, vignetting is notorious. It's really hard. You have to spend a lot of money on a lens that is a wide lens that does not vignette very much. It's just because of the extreme of the lens. What happens is that the corners specifically tend to be darker than the center of the image. You lose exposure. It is a consequence of the lens design and, again, how hard you're pushing the lens. And that same thing is happening here. So again, if you turn this thing on and off, you'll notice that the corners of these images all not only appear to come closer to you, but they also appear to be lightening up. So that is actually fixing the vignetting on it. If you zoom in, and I need everybody to zoom in, and you need to zoom in to 400%. And one of the things that drives me nuts about the new interface that they've actually got with this version of Capture One is that Camera Raw, is that if you click on the zoom tool and you actually move in, and the area that I want you to move in are the small little branches that are on the mirror in the area right underneath that guy's arm. That's what I want you to come into. The problem is that to actually pick up chromatic aberration, you need to be in at 400%, and this tool simply toggles back and forth between positive and negative. So to get into 400%, you use the drop-down menu at the very bottom of your screen, and click on that drop-down menu and click 400%. 400% is pretty much considered the standard zoom that you want to be to spot chromatic aberration. You won't really spot it at anything less. And you can also, if you zoom in too much, you don't really have a reference to actually pick up the chromatic aberration. And so to show you what chromatic aberration actually is, you can't see it on mine right now because I've got this check mark on here to remove chromatic aberration, but I'm going to uncheck that. And what I want you to take a look at, we might even be able to zoom into 800%. Let me see here really quick. Yeah, you can see it a little bit easier at 800%, and you can certainly see it on my screen right here. You'll see that on one side of these branches, you actually have a green edge on it, and it's a little more subtle, but on the other side, on the opposite side, you actually have a magenta edge on it. This is a consequence of chromatic aberration. And it's basically opposite colors. Again, if we talk about our LAB space, these would be considered those green magenta axis, which is the A axis. You also can find chromatic aberration that goes in the opposite axis, that goes from blue to green, from blue to yellow. It's nowhere near as pronounced as the green magenta one in here, but you can see the problem that exists right here. If you turn on remove chromatic aberration, it simply goes away. Now, the very first time I actually shot this file, the first time I processed this file, this feature did not exist. So guess who had to clone stamp the chromatic aberration out of this image? Yeah, look at this image. Would you want to do that? No. So you definitely want this to be on by default. So again, it used to be in the old days of Photoshop, you would simply make these corrections like this, and then you would go to this little the drop-down menu that's all the way over on the side, and there was a thing in there that would allow you to actually use this as your new set of defaults. That no longer exists in this. So instead, what they have done is, and I want everybody to do this part, is we need to get to the options part of Camera Raw. And there's two places that you can get to it. You can get to it here in Camera Raw. It's the little gear that sits up at the very top right-hand corner. If you click on that, it will open up the preferences for Camera Raw. So here in Camera Raw, we'll just go through this part really quickly. If you want to actually change where your screen is, number one, I hate the rich tooltips, so I uncheck that. Now, if you are feeling like you don't really, you're just more learning this, you might want to keep those show rich tooltips turned on. But basically, they'll open up and they'll show you a more expanded version of what the tool does. Some of them will actually have small little videos that they'll run to explain to you how the whole thing is going, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, that's how that part is. For me, I prefer the film strip along the, instead of having a horizontal film strip, I actually prefer a vertical one that'll be on the left-hand side. So you can actually click on that film strip drop-down menu and say, I want you to show this to me vertically. And then when we click OK on this, it'll actually do that part. This has not been something that existed in Camera Raw for a very long time. You can actually now show ratings and color labels in Camera Raw. This will come in from Lightroom if you've actually used Lightroom. It does not work, or I'd say it does not work. I haven't really tested this out, but never before has it worked. If you do your ratings and color tagging in Capture One, those are not respected by Adobe and vice versa. Again, we might be able to actually use the Adobe Zoom In style. I'm going to have to actually check that one out. I do like legacy shortcuts. Again, the primary legacy shortcut is a single Command Z will just undo an action that you've performed. Command Z redoes it back again. If you want to do progressive back through history, you actually have to do Command Option, or in the case of Windows, Control Option Z to actually go back through it. I just prefer this. Again, I've been working in Photoshop for a very long time, so that's for me. The next one down in terms of file handling, this is how we can simply leave this the way it is actually set. However, because things have changed now, if you want support, so for instance, if you've got a JPEG or a TIFF that you want to open up into Camera Raw, it's not a legitimate sense of working in Camera Raw, because again, Camera Raw is really designed to work on raw files. A TIFF is not a raw file, and a JPEG is not a raw file. Those are both baked files. They're processed files. They're not the raw files. However, you can use all the controls that you have in Camera Raw on TIFFs, on baked files, on TIFFs and on JPEGs. However, now you've got the Camera Raw filter that's actually inside of Photoshop, which recreates this exact same behavior. So there's really no fundamental reason to actually support this. So anyway, this is where it would be in these drop-down menus. You can disable all of this. You can actually enable automatically open JPEGs. These HEICs, this is Apple's sort of version of a updated version of a JPEG. A lot of people are beginning to adopt this, so and that's pretty much why it's here. At any rate, and then the same thing for your TIFF support. You can do TIFFs that have already got settings in them, or open all TIFFs, whatever. So if you want to turn that on, this is where you actually turn it on, and it can be a temporary thing. The next one down in terms of performance, in this case, I would leave all of this at its defaults. The next thing down at raw defaults, this is where you actually make those changes. So by default, up at the very top, you guys probably have Adobe default. Does anybody have anything else? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to keep the Adobe defaults, but I want to add that chromatic aberration correction and the lens correction both, and they've built this into a preset. So if you click on that drop-down menu and come down and say choose preset, there's a whole set of options here that you can choose to actually create what you think should be the default. And if you come all the way down to optics, you will see down in optics that one of the things that you can add to this is lens plus chromatic aberration correction. You want to go ahead and click on that. And then you'll see what you get up here is that it'll tell you, okay, we're going to do the defaults plus chromatic aberration and this lens and applying the lens profile. That will then turn this into a default behavior, and you won't have to do it for every single image that you open up in Camera Raw, which is great. And then finally, workflow, the last thing down. We did go through this before. This is another place, in addition to the hyperlink that sits beneath your Camera Raw window, where you can actually enable everything that when you actually make the move from Camera Raw into Photoshop, that you do it as a smart object, that you're bringing your raw data in as a smart object. There's no real point in doing resizing at this stage of the game. If you need to upsample or downsample, there's probably better ways of doing this now inside of Photoshop. There's actually another feature that allows, if you guys, I don't know if you've gotten into it Enhance yet, we'll look at upsampling and downsampling later on. We did talk about the fact that you would never want to do output sharpening at this stage of the game, because we are making master files in this class, and a master file can then be reprocessed for screen, it can be reprocessed for print, it can be reprocessed for a billboard or reprocessed for a postcard. All of those different end games for your file require separate, different, discrete, unique process sharpening. So you would never want to do your sharpening right here. However, this is where you can change the color space that you're actually working in. So these are all possibilities for us. Most of this class would only work with Adobe RGB, sRGB, or ProPhoto RGB. We've had conversations about this before. Again, the sort of workflow that's strongly suggested in this class, the one that I use in my own personal work, is Adobe RGB in 8-bit. And then you can simply say OK to this. And when that happens, these now chromatic aberrations and lens profile corrections will be on forevermore, and you will be good to go. So we can hit cancel out of all of this. That part's actually been done. And we are going to actually process that file. Yes. Okay, so let's start with a brand new version of it. So if we go to, this was still in, I think, week number 2 in the assignment folder. Inside the assignment folder, it was the last of the assignments of the assignment folder. I think this is where the girl is, actually. So there was the, mine are just listed by name, but the folder that we're looking for here is the one that ends in the folder extension in the 03. If you click on inside of that, there's a capture folder. Inside of that, there is an image of a girl and a guy. And there is also an image of the girl by herself with the bag. This was the one that you guys were supposed to be using. Does anybody have DNGs in their folder right now? Okay, I want everybody to pitch those DNGs. We're going to go through this process one more time because they can get confusing. So I'm going to ask you just to pitch the DNGs. And then we're going to start strictly with the first one, the girl and the guy with the card. So if you can double click on that, this will actually open up. And my first move right now is, again, this is now base. The only thing that I've added to this is the remove chromatic aberration and the use profile corrections on here. You can close up the optics. It was proving to me that that part was actually there, which is great. I need to make a DNG out of this guy. I don't really care about anything else that's going on in here, even though it says the profile here is camera standard. Again, it's amazing how they keep changing all of this. If we were to use the last version of Camera Raw, it would have been Adobe standard on here, but nonetheless, doesn't matter. The little icon that's at the very top on the right-hand side of the box with an arrow pointing straight down, you want to click on that. All this does is make a DNG using whatever we've got set up in here. But we don't care about anything. We don't care about the camera standard. We don't care about any of that kind of stuff. This DNG is simply going to be used to create our sensor profile. So I'm going to hit save. It will actually then save this DNG to right next to where it is inside of your Finder or wherever it is in the class files for the people who are on Windows. At this stage of the game, you can simply hit done. It's done its job, and then we can go into the Finder and find it. It's sitting right here, DNG. You'll also notice that there is an XMP file in here as well. Again, the XMP file is designed to, because you cannot directly edit a raw file. You can process a raw file, but you cannot edit the raw file. So to remember what it is that you've done when you go to process a raw file, Adobe creates this XMP file. It's called a Sidecar File as well, that simply lists any changes that you've made in there. So to show you that, I want to make sure everybody understands that. Open that CR2 again for me. Don't open the DNG again. Just open the CR2. We can use this as an example. And in the CR2, I want you to open up the basic panel, and I want you to take the exposure value, and I want you to bump it all the way up to +5. And go ahead and hit done again. So really blowing this image out. Then I want you to go into your Finder or wherever these files are and take a look at your XMP file. This is a text file. You can actually open this with a text editor. So in my case, I'm going to right-click on this and pick either Microsoft Word or text edit or whatever. For the people who are on Windows, you simply need to open this in any text editor that you have. So I'm going to control-click on this. I'm going to say open this guy with, not with photos. I'm going to open it with something else. And in my others, I'm going to go down in my applications folder and I'm going to find my text editor. So again, you don't even need to do this using Word. And you'll see it opens up. And again, I've already told you guys I'm dyslexic, so I see this and looks rather daunting to me. But to explain it at its simplest, this is all the metadata about your camera and everything, including how everything is processed. So if we look at the very top, you don't need to read through all of this shit. It's basically, it tells you up in here that the make of the model right here was a Canon EOS 5D Mark II, that it gives me my orientation of it. It'll give me the lens that was in here. If I had any sort of a bias in here, all of that kind of stuff is actually loaded in here. As you scroll down through this, though, and if you've got a find feature, you can actually ask it to find the word exposure. But if you look at my screen right down here, you will see that there's this thing called a Crs Exposure, and right across from it, it has a +5 in here. I've highlighted it on my screen right here. That is simply a record of what we said that we wanted to have actually happen inside of Camera Raw. So if the next time I launch this file into Camera Raw, it simply reads this. This is a recipe. That's all this is. It's simply a recipe. If you go in and you change that +5 to, say, let's go to a +2 instead, and then save this file. So I'm going to just come up here, and I'm going to come down and save the file, and I'm going to close it, and then I'm going to come back to my CR2, and I'm going to double click on it again, and it'll come into Camera Raw, and you'll notice now that my exposure is set at a +2 because it read that change from the text file. So that XMP file, all it's designed to do, all it's ever designed to do is to record how you want your file processed. Because again, we cannot edit this raw file. So to show you this at its most extreme, I want you to just whack these sliders as far as you can, like every which way. Leave something in here. You can actually change the highlights. You can turn the thing black and white. You can actually open up the shadows. You can crush the whites. You can throw all sorts of clarity on here. You can really, so this is a very different file than I started with. I'm going to go ahead and hit done with that. I'm going to then come back. I'm going to reopen that CR2. And you'll notice that it's got all that weird shit that's happening to it. If I hit cancel out of here, go back into my Finder, throw away that XMP file, and then open the CR2, you'll notice that it goes back to its defaults because all of that weird information is kept in the XMP file. Now what a DNG does is it actually takes that XMP. When we look at a DNG, if we come back down here, you can cancel out of this. I just want to make sure everybody understands what XMP files are. If we take a look at this DNG, I'm going to see if I can actually crack this thing open. And it's not going to let me actually open this up. This looks like a normal file to you guys. This looks just like the CR2 file, but the truth of it is this is a folder. And inside the folder is a copy of the raw data and a copy of that XMP file. And it just gives you the illusion that this is a single file, but it isn't. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, so at this stage of the game, I need you to go to your application folder, and we are going to launch the camera, the color checker camera profiling, whatever they call it, the color checker camera calibration app. Again, it's the color. They use a different name for Windows. Don't ask me why, but it's close to this. Simply double click it to launch it. It's going to remind me to calibrate my monitor. Make sure that you do have the DNG. That's, if we look at the 3 tabs along the top, that the DNG is the one that is selected. I'm going to go find that file now that I did, the DNG that I just created. And drag that on top. And while I'm still in my Finder, I'm going to select the name of the file and simply copy that to my clipboard. Go back into my color calibration checker, and it actually found the target, and you can see the little squares are exactly where they should be. If they were not, you can use your cursor to actually move the little dots in the corners to relocate it. You can actually use, there's zoom tools and hand tools all over here to make sure that this thing actually is on the target. Mine is on the target. I'm going to click on Create Profile. It's going to offer to name this again after my camera model. That doesn't help me, so I'm going to get rid of that. I don't want to get rid of the .dcp. That extension is important for me to keep. So I'm simply going to hit delete to get rid of it. And then normally on a Macintosh, you could hit Command V to paste that name in. But if you do that, nothing happens. Normally you could come up to the edit menu and come down and click paste as well, but we have no edit menu. So instead you use a drop-down menu for this, right in this location. Now on Macintosh you get a drop-down menu using the Control key and clicking, and you'll get this drop-down menu that says paste. Macintosh also will do, if you're on a trackpad, a double finger swipe down will actually also give you a drop-down menu. Windows people have had right clicks forever. Macintosh was late to the party, but Windows has had them forever. So however you do a right click on Windows World, you do the right click to get this drop-down menu and click on paste, and it will put the name of that file, the name of our shooting into here, and it's going to put it in, this is where it's going to go, exactly where it should, in my camera profiles, blah, 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 blah. So that part's great. I'm going to go ahead and hit save to this. And it says now that the profile has been created successfully. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And then I can simply quit this program. It's done everything it needs to do. I can also pitch that DNG that made it. And this is a good habit to get into because this is what screwed some of you guys up. If we were to then use this DNG profile right now and reset the camera profile setting in it, it does not remember it. When you take it to another machine. It remembers it as long as you are on your machine that's got that DNG embedded in your system. But when you take it to someone else, like I just showed you guys earlier, you get that warning triangle. So I'm going to get rid of the DNG profile. It's done everything it needed to do. I'm going to select both of the raw files again and open both of them into Camera Raw. And once I come into Camera Raw, I can actually then do these things that will give me a new base for the file that I really want to work with. I don't want to work with the one that's got the color card in it, but it's got all the information. So the first move I'm going to make is up at the very top. I'm going to change its profile. So I've got the, you don't have to have them both selected right now, just have the one that's got the color card in it. I'm going to click on the up at profile right underneath the Instagram, right underneath edit where it says camera profile. Mine says camera standard. Yours may say something else. Doesn't matter. We're going to change it to the custom one anyway. Just to the right of that is an icon that looks like 3 little squares with a magnifying glass in the bottom left, bottom right hand corner. That's where you can browse your profiles. If you click on that, it'll actually open up a bunch of thumbnails. Again, scroll down through all the thumbnails. You are looking for the drop-down menu that simply says Profiles. It doesn't say anything else, it just says Profiles. If you click on that to actually open it up, you will see that inside your folder, in my case I've got 2 of them because I've made one of these before. In your case, you should only have 1 of them, unless you probably have the carryover from the one that you made last time. In this case, it doesn't matter. They're the exact same profile. Simply click on one of them to go ahead and apply this profile. Then back up to the top right underneath your Instagram, there's a little the word that says back with an arrow pointing to the left. If you click on that, it gets you out of that browser, and you will notice that the profile is actually up here. That part's great. But I also want to color balance, and all of this applies to the image that's underneath. All of this applies to the girl with the one in the bag, but she has nothing in here that I could white balance on the bag, I could try to white balance on the building, but I want a legitimate true white balance, and the most exact version of that's going to be with this card. So I'm going to pick the little eyedropper tool next to the word that says white balance in the basic panel on the right hand side, click on the eyedropper, and come over and click on the little gray square just underneath the red square on the card. That will actually color balance this image. So now this image has got both the profile in it and the color balancing, the custom color balancing. You'll see it changed from as shot to custom. Then I need to apply both of those settings, the white balance and the profile setting, to the image that's actually underneath. To do that, hover over the thumbnail of the image that's got the card in it. When you hover over the thumbnail, you'll see at the very top you have Again, that little box with the square pointing down and then 3 arrows, 3 dots. If you click on those little 3 dots, you'll get a flyout menu. And the first thing you want to do is select all. What we're doing is we are selecting all the thumbnails. Now, there is only one other thumbnail in here, but I want everybody selected. So I'm going to hit select all. If you had 1,000 of these images, you could do the same thing to them. And then I'm going to go right back to that same little 3 dots again, still on the image that's got the color card in it. Click on that. I'll get a flyout menu, and I want to sync my settings. What that's saying is that anything that I've done in my settings to this image that has the card in it, I want to apply those to all the other images that I've selected. Now, I've only got one other image, but that's fine. So I'm going to sync my settings, and you'll notice in this drop-down menu here, under the default part, you can actually, again, they've changed all this. If you take the default up to all in that little drop-down menu, you will see everything that they've actually decided to sync. In our case, the only 2 things that we've done were color balance and a new profile. So the fact that everything else is selected as well doesn't make any difference to me. I'm simply going to hit OK. And now when I click on the other image, the image that's actually underneath, you will notice that I do have the embedded profile is in there, the correct one, and I've also got a custom white balance. At this stage of the game, we want to create a DNG of this, because this will be the initial DNG that has that profile and that custom white balance. And if you do it this way, then when you move that file to another machine, all of the embedded profile part will go with it, and you will not have these, it won't be orphaned, because your profile that you use to actually do the color balancing on this is not left behind on your computer. So I'm simply going to make a DNG of this. Again, the little square with the arrow pointing down in the top right-hand corner, click on that. It'll actually make a DNG of this, and I'm going to go ahead and say done. And go back and take a look at what I've got going on here. And now you can see that I've actually got a DNG of that second image, the image that has got the girl with the bag in it. This is a copy of my raw data, but it's also got, it's been color balanced, and it's also got that custom profile is embedded in this DNG. So this becomes my new raw file. And if I double click on it, it will actually open up in-camera raw, again with the correct custom white balance on it and the correct profile on it. And then I can actually go to work on this thing and actually to figure out basically what's really going on in here. So a lot of you guys developed this file in a number of different ways. Some of them were some of them good, some of them not so good. I'm just going to show you a few tricks that I would actually go through and talk about, ways that I would actually look at this file. But before we do that, I need everybody, again, you will not see this on the video because this is something we need to do on the background wall right here. But I need everybody to come look at this. Should have turned these lights on sooner, but they'll get on soon enough. I need everybody to come back here and take a look at this image. Let's let these guys kick on. They'll hopefully kick on relatively quick. Yeah, I'm gonna kill these ugly fluorescent lights. Who sings in this room? Anyone? Who hums? Just looking for a little Jeopardy music, that's all. Just a little dun, 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 dun. All right, thank you. Okay, so let me explain what this is that you're actually looking at. This is just a synthetic file that I've made. And so what it is it's just a step wedge of grays. So it's sort of hard to see it in this area right in here. It's a little bit easier to see it in here. But basically, they're 1-inch squares. And this first 1-inch square, the numbers along the top give you the level of gray that it is. Okay? So in this first square right here, it's 0, which means it's completely black. In the little square right next to it, it's a 3, which is very close to black, but not quite black. And then I work my way up to a 6, to 9, 12, 15, 18, whatever. Then this one on the bottom is 24, 27. So it's just every time I take the next step, I'm adding 3 levels of gray to it, making it 3 levels of gray lighter. To the point that I finally get here, this is 45. So does that make sense? If we were doing RGB colors, it would be 45, 45, 45. If we were doing RGB colors, this would be 12, 12, 12. I mean, that's all it is. Does that make sense to everyone what's going on? Then in the center of every single one of these, I've put down the initial V, and the V is completely black in all of them. So the V is black in every single one of them, but the surround, the field that they're on, goes from completely black to, this is nowhere near a middle gray, but it's moving towards middle gray. Does that make sense to everyone what's going on? So that's the top row. On the bottom row down here, it's basically the same deal. We're starting here. In this case, we're doing very light tones. So we're starting here. This is a 234, 237, 240, 243, 246, 249, 252, and then finally a 255. And 255 is pure white. So this is just very, very, very light tones of gray. Does that make sense to everyone what's going on here? And those, instead of having a black V on them, they've actually got a white V on them. That's why you can actually see the distinction between the two, right? So that's kind of what's going on here. Make sense, everybody? So the reason you build these things is that this is what people will talk about, setting white point and black point till they're blue in the face in your Photoshop files, but nobody ever tells you why and what you're doing. Everybody will just say, oh, set the black point at, just find the darkest part of your image, whatever, find the number 10 in your image and set that as your black point and you'll be fine. That's all bullshit. White point and black point only really talk about and define for you highlight and shadow detail. Those are far more important to me than a black point or a white point, a pure white point or pure black point. It's where do I want detail, where do I want shadow detail, and where do I want highlight detail. Does that make sense? So what I'm done here with this chart is figured out, this will tell you where your highlight and shadow detail should actually be. So this is the exercise. I need every one of you to get close here. And what I want you to do is I want you to look, we'll start with the shadow detail first. What I want you to do is look at this step wedge right here and decide for yourself at what tone can you distinctly see the V separated from the background. Now, I don't mean just barely separated. Just barely separated is not shadow detail. I mean full on, you can spot the V from the background. So I need you to come up here and look at this and then look at the number that's right underneath and say, okay, oh, well, I can see it right here at number 9. I can see the V separate from the background. If you can see that and you say that, I'll say you're a liar. So I need everybody to look at this thing. You can move in closer, and I just want you to tell me, decide for yourself, where do you truly see the V separated from the background? And look at the number that is right below it or right above it so that you know what value you need to have for shadow detail. So while you're all standing there looking at it, what number? 18. I have an 18. Anybody else? 19? Is there even a 19 in there?
He said 15.
Oh, 15. So I have a 15, I have an 18. Anybody else? So again, I'm going to reiterate, not just barely be able to see the separation, but truly see the separation well between the V and the background. We're talking about shadow detail here, and telling you right now that 15 is not shadow detail. That 15 is threshold going into black.
39.
39? 27? Any other takers?
30? 36.
36? I don't think there, oh, is there, there's a 36 in there. So for me, in looking at this and just doing a whole bunch of this, for me, it falls somewhere between 25 and 30. That's pretty much where I see. So it's, for me, it's this range that's right into here. Somewhere into here, I feel like I can see that V separated well. This is a little too extreme up here. Sure, if I'm up here with that light set correctly, I can actually pick out the V, depending on the light, probably right here at 15, but that is not shadow detail. Somewhere in this 27 to 30, for me, is where it works. Now, this is for this piece of paper. You got to do this depending on the prints that you do. For if you are printing on your own other piece of paper. So glossy has more detail in it than matte paper will actually have in it. Matte paper diffuses light more. So you actually need your shadow detail even higher for matte paper to actually be able to see it. But basically that's where it is. So we're going to call this somewhere 25 to 30. Make sense? Now we need to do the flip side for the highlights. So where do you see the V? So obviously you can't see the V at the 255 because they're both white. So where do you distinctly see the V separating from the background?
46.
46?
Yeah. 43.
43? Anyone else? Kind of in that range there. Okay, that's all I want to do. Let's go back to our chairs and we'll talk about how we can use this now. Okay, so I want to start with the highlight detail first. We said basically, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, but I had a 246 on there. In my opinion, it actually, the highlight detail is somewhere between 245 and 250. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Haven't we had this conversation in this class that you use this little color card to set perfect exposure? And how do you do that? You shoot a picture of this tethered. You actually white balance it. And then you look at the white patch at the very top and you set it between 245 and 250. That is not some weird fucking abstract. It comes from this. Does this make sense to everyone? This is all connected. All of those teachers who have just told you people's shit and expected you to believe them and take them blindly, that is not who I am. There's a reason behind all of this, and that's the reason behind all of this. The reason we use this color card to do that is because of this. So you should know, I have only had perfect exposure in every single photograph I've done for the last 25 years. And you people come in and start reprocessing my fucking perfect exposure. Shame on all of you. It was set. You don't need to change that. However, there are things that we can change and things that we need to look at. So the next thing that we're going to look at is our shadow detail. So when I look at this image, I need to figure out what should be shadow detail. Now I'm zooming in right by this girl's underarm right here because it sort of gives me a range of places that things could actually be. So I also need to be able to see the belt at the very bottom. So I'm going to scooch up a little bit right here. So when you look at this image, where is your shadow detail? Where is shadow detail for you guys? What part of her, what part of this image should be where my shadow detail is? Now, you need to realize that there are, shadow detail again is not a black point. Shadow detail is where you want to really be able to see. In the case, I'm going to look at her outfit. I'm going to say in case of the fabric. But let's do this really quickly. Zoom into her arm where her hand is that it's actually holding the bag. And if you actually look inside, you will be able to see the return, the back side of the inside of that sleeve. You'll actually be able to get down there and in that and see it. And if you hover your cursor over it, in the case of mine, when I'm looking at mine, it gives me an RGB reading of 12, 10, and 10. So basically averages out to basically a gray scale, a gray tone of 11. Is that shadow detail? No. What did we say was shadow detail? 25 to 30. Should that be shadow detail? No. It's the fucking inside of this girl's sleeve. There would never be shadow detail in there. So the biggest problem that a lot of you guys have at this stage of the game is figuring out what really should be shadow detail. So for me, if I hover over the side of her pants near here, again, I'm looking up at the top of my screen right here. I'm getting 23s, sort of, 23, 22, 20. That is becoming very close to shadow detail, and that's for me where I actually think it should be. If I come up to the part of her shoulder area that's near that swirl of little hair in there and actually look at that reading, again, I've got a 23, 26, 24 along the very top. That is perfect shadow detail. That's exactly where this should be. Does this make sense, everyone? Are we good on this part? So this image, at least as far as I can tell right now, should be perfectly exposed. However, I don't have a reference for my color card in here. That part is not existing in here anymore. So there is a way to check, and this is a very specific thing. This comes out of years of working in the fashion game, so I'm just going to throw this one out to you. This is something that any good digital tech in your life should actually know. It's another good trick. It's how you can determine proper exposure. Now, this is very, again, very specific. Either write this down right now. There's a couple of numbers I'm going to throw at you right now that you probably should write down right now. The first is that, again, you want your shadow detail for the most part. Again, detail, not your black points, but the detail to be somewhere in that mid-20s range. Your highlight, again, where you want texture, where you want detail in your highlights, somewhere in that 245 to 250 range. But then when it comes to exposure, and this again is very specific, but I'm just going to throw this out to you. If you measure the highlight on a Caucasian skin and you look at the R channel, it should read somewhere between 225 and 245 if your image is properly exposed. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we look at this girl's face, I'm going to zoom in again on her face a little bit tighter. If we take a look at this girl's face right here, it's sort of hard to pick up the hottest of the highlights in here, which is what I'm really looking for. It's going to be somewhere right above the bridge of her nose. It could actually be on the very tip of her nose. I'm going to go actually up to the very top part in here. And you can see, so if I'm doing the bridge of her nose part in here, you can actually see I'm getting an R value of 221. That is not quite where I should be. That indicates a slight underexposure on this. Again, remember, the range that I want this to be in is going to be that 225 to 245. Now, other things that you need to be aware of. This only works on Caucasian skin. This only works on a highlight on Caucasian skin. And you need to avoid anything that has been heavily made up. So anything that would be really serious foundation, you want to avoid that. You would certainly avoid anything that had blush or eyeshadow or anything else on it like that. You want to avoid those because those will pervert your numbers. So for me, this seems slightly down. So to fix that, the range that I can actually put this in, if you come over to your tools that are on the far right-hand side and come down to the little three, no, not the little three dots, keep going all the way down, almost to the bottom, you have a color sampler tool that's at the very bottom. It's right underneath the hand. It looks like the eyedropper with that little emblem on it. If you click on that, and then come out and actually find that highlight point again. I'm looking at my histogram while I do this readout here, and I'm going to click and drop a point. You'll see it'll actually put down a color sampler just like it works in Photoshop. It's just a sort of a permanent thing so that I can now watch what's actually going on. And now I can actually adjust the exposure on this if I feel inclined to do so. Now, the point that I found on my second try at this was a 225. For me, that's threshold. It meets the requirement. It's within exactly where I want to be. Now, the rest of it might be a pictorial decision for me. So, but for the time being right now, I'm going to say that this file, as this raw file is as perfect as this thing can get right now. From a numbers point of view, that's basically what's going on. That does not mean from an artistic point of view, this is the way I want my image to look. I could say, well, I want my image to be a whole lot moodier and darker. Oh, I want it to be a whole lot brighter and blown out. Or, those are decisions that you can make after the fact. But this is to get me to my base. Does that make sense, everyone? So I am going to go ahead and simply click open on this. Now, in my case, open has not gotten sticky. This should have been smart objects, should have been listed here. It should say open as object. It doesn't. Again, to change that, if you click on the hyperlink that's right underneath this big thumbnail that we're working with, it'll bring you back into your camera preferences, and I'm going to click on open as in Photoshop as smart objects. I want that to be my default behavior. And you'll see it says open object now. If you temporarily want to turn that off, if you just, let's say 99% of the images that you actually open are always going to be smart objects, fine, you leave it this way. But let's say there's this one image that you just want to open, you don't want it to be a smart object. All you do is hold down the Shift key and it'll actually get rid of that object, and this would now open as a regular file. But I do want it to open as a smart object, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And it'll kick in and actually open up as a smart object. Now, I can do the very same tricks that I've done before. I'm going to come in here just to make sure I was right and look at this area that's under the shoulder. I'm getting into those 20, sort of mid-20s to 30s. That's actually what's happening in here. So that part is actually good for me. That's correct. If I come up to her face up in here, again, I'm just hovering around this part in here. I'm getting in those, again, that R channel is reading in the sort of like to 220s, 225, whatever. For me, I actually like my images bumped up a little bit. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to change this here in Camera Raw. So I'm going to add a curve on top of this. I could go back into Camera Raw and reprocess, but I'm going to leave it here and do it here just again because we've got some other numbers to talk about, and then we're going to get out of this image. So I'm going to come up to the top of this. I'm sorry. I'm going to add a curve on top of this. And with the curve on top of this, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put a color sampler point on this spot, on that highlight part of her face. That's what I'm going to go for. So I'm going to grab my color sampler tool, and I'm going to drop that curve. Again, I found that 225 point again, so I've clicked it. It's actually dropped the point down. Again, I've got before and after readouts here that are showing me the change that I'm going to ultimately make with my curve. And then I want to actually boost this whole thing up. I don't want to change its coloring. I just want to lift it up a little bit so it's a little bit brighter. To do that, over here on the Properties panel for your curve, if you look at the very top, there's a picture, or there's an icon of a little hand with a finger pointing. That is the Targeting Adjustment tool. If you click on that tool and come back over onto your image, you will notice that your image now looks like an eyedropper, and you'll also notice if you move around your image that you get a point that's sliding up and down your curved line right here. All it's doing is showing you what's underneath this image. So if I come over to the dark part of her suit, you can see it's down in the shadow area. If I come up to the white of her teeth, you can see it's up in the highlight area. It just allows you to target the point that you want to change. I'm going to click on this point that's right at the very top of her. I'm going to click and then simply start to drag up. And you'll see it did put a point down. I'm getting an after change right here. And for me, I'm going to bump this up to a 235. That's usually where I like my images to ultimately be. I'm going to double click on the hand to get it to drop back out. I don't want to still see that color sampler point on her face. So I'm going to click on the color sampler tool again, and then up in my options bar, I can click clear all, and it actually gets rid of this guy. And then I can simply turn my curve on and off, and you can see for me, I actually think it brightens this girl up. I like that part of her. So for me, that's pretty much where I'm going to go with this image. Now, again, I need to recheck what's happened down in the armpit area right here. You can see that when I did that curve, that those have now, that area down there has actually been lifted now into the mid-30s. That's a little too hot for me. So again, I'm going to simply click on the Targeting Adjustment tool. I'm going to come over into this area near her armpit that actually should be more in the mid-20s. You can see in my info palette it's reading mid-30s. I'm simply going to click a point there and slightly drag down till I get into sort of the mid-30s. And this is the curve that I'm actually now putting on my image, not based on just looking at this image or believing my screen, but simply based on the numbers. And this part's right. And look at the difference in this image. Makes it really snappy. That part I actually like. So now I've got an image, raw file, smart object. If we double click on the smart object again, you'll notice that it does have the custom profile in it. It has been custom white balanced, and I am off to the races. So the only other thing that people would do or possibly do on this image is, and it's what everybody did. Everybody makes the white wall a little bit darker. Everybody made the background of the storefront a little bit darker, the bag a little bit lighter. And people did those kinds of things on this. For me, everybody does this, and it's just the way that you guys think. And I'm going to try to challenge you in the way you think. You look at a white wall and you say, okay, it's a white wall, it's near being burnt out. That means I need to bring it down. Why? Is that a visual decision? Or is that merely saying, okay, I see something and I'm going to push it towards the middle? Well, if you do that in all of your imagery, everything gets pushed to the middle, then you end up with nothing but a really flat image with all your tonality in the very middle. Not what you really want to do. You need to think about the real purpose of this image. And so for me, the real purpose of this image is not to make that white wall darker and not to make the storefront darker. It's to really isolate this girl and make her pop. So if I make the storefront darker, it starts to get close in tonality to the outfit that she's wearing. So she doesn't pop. If anything, I am pushing her into that storefront tonality. Does that make sense to everyone? So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to do this down and dirty again. We've already done some great selection methods last week, but for the time being right now, I'm just going to do a brand new version of this really quickly. We're just going to do this quick, down and dirty. Anyway, I'm going to grab the quick selection tool. Let's try this. Let's see how the select subject works. We'll just see right here. So if you click any of the selection tools, so the magic wand tool, the quick selection tool, the lasso tool, the marquee tool, any of those tools, whatever, you will get up in the options palette a little tab that says select subject. You also get the select and mask workspace tab up there. Just click on select subject and let's see how this guy does. And it does a fair job of this, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. I'm not going to really worry about the bag right now. Again, this is not going to be refined. We're going to look at refining edges in just a second. It's not going to be refined at that. I'm just sort of going to see what happens here. I am going to save this selection, so up to the select menu, down to save selection, and we'll just call it body. And hit Command D to deselect. I need to make a new version of this smart object, so again, we cannot just drag this down. We need to make a copy of it because I want to process it separately. Again, and pretty much everybody in this class got the parametric dodge and burning down correctly. And that's amazing. That's a first. So you guys are rocking here. So good for you. Anyway, I need to make a new copy of this. So again, I'm going to come up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects and New Copy, New Smart Object via Copy. It'll make a new copy of it, and then I'm going to drag this on top of the curve because the curve is actually impacting my whole overall image. I'm going to now reprocess this smart object that's on top of it for the background. So this curve I don't want the curve affecting the background at all. So I'm going to double click on this, the one that I've pulled up to the very top. And again, I want to blow this out. So I'm going to crank on this, and I'm really going to nuke this out. I want to keep some detail in that background, but not a heck of a lot. So I'm going to bring it up. In my case, I've added 2 1/4 stops to the exposure of this. Now, it doesn't really matter. We can actually bring that whole part back down. So again, if it's too strong, whatever, this is just where I'm going to start. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. It blows out this image completely. I need to then mask the girl off. So this is not the version of the girl that I see. I actually want to see the version of the girl underneath. So to do that, I'm going to scroll down in my channels palette, and again, down at the very bottom is a channel, an alpha channel, that is a black and white mask that would be of that girl. You do not select that channel, just hover over the thumbnail, hold down the Control or Command key, and click. It will load that as a selection. And then come back over to the layer that's got the very top layer, the really blown out background, whatever, and I'm going to simply add as the layer mask. Now in this case, it does exactly the opposite. It actually allows the blown out version of the girl to show, and it hides the whole rest of the building underneath it. Simply invert the mask. So to invert the mask, you make sure that the little brackets are around the mask, and you hit Command I, and watch the screen, watch the little thumbnail, and you'll see what happens. Everything that was white turns black, and everything that was black turns white. So now all of a sudden, this girl is screaming out of this image. She's totally popped out of this image, right? So some of you might say, well, yeah, she's separated much better here. To see the difference, turn off the eyeball that's right next to it. This is the point that I'm trying to make to you guys. For me, as a fashion shooter, this is visually far better than for me to be doing the opposite. This is what a lot of you guys did. If you double click on the smart object that is the very top layer, the blown out version right now, we can go in the opposite direction. Pull this down till it's -2 stops. and say OK. And now you see she's basically blending into the background. Does this make sense, everybody, what I'm doing here? What's going on here? So don't approach this stuff by just saying, okay, that's really hot, I need to make it less hot. And that's really dark, I need to make it brighter. It's never just about the opposites. It's all about the visual choices that you're making. So I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that part. If you feel like this is too much, if you feel like, well, you just blew that out too strong, it's just too hot here, it's, you know, there's too much going on here. You have two options. You could double click on the smart object, go back in and change it. And you could actually, instead of having it 2 1/4 stops over, you could change it down to say like 1 3/4, 1 1/2, whatever. The problem with that is that it's really hard to see. We don't have the benefit of being able to see the whole image while we're doing it. So we're just guessing, applying it, and then if it works, great. If you want to watch it in real time, simply select that top layer and drop its opacity. That's all we need to do. If you take the opacity slider that's at the very top of the layers palette, that's right across from the blending mode, right here where it says, I typically hover over the word that says opacity. I get the scrubby slider, which is the hand. If you click and drag to the left, it reduces it. If you click and drag to the right, it increases it. But if you click and drag to the left all the way down to 0 and let go, it essentially turns that layer off. So then I can click on it and I can start to drag it back up, and I can watch this in real time slowly until it reaches the point that I sort of like the separation between the two. And so for me, I got up around 75%-ish, 73% about, and that's where I actually think this image ultimately ends up looking much, much better. Final thing on this, color. So we need to zoom in on the color of this girl's face. I'd actually do it on her face. We're going to pick a spot on this face to actually try to balance color as well. I'm going to do it underneath. So again, well, actually, no, I can do, yeah, we can do it on the whole image. That part doesn't matter. What I'm looking for here, again, this is not entirely restricted to Caucasian, or so I'm going to just throw out these numbers. Again, you guys need to write these down. These things will haul your backside out of the fire more than you can possibly imagine. So this is basically how it works. I need to do the same trick I was doing before. I don't want to really go highlights. What I'm looking for is a mid skin tone, not something that's in highlights, real serious highlights, not something that's in serious shadows, but sort of mid skin tone, but definitely not something that has been, had makeup applied to it, had sunburn. You want to avoid those kind of things. So for me, I'm going to avoid this left side of her face, but I'm going to go for a mark, and I'm also going to avoid the area that's right up above the bridge of her nose. I'm going to go up a little bit higher here, and I'm going to put down a color sampler point. So again, pick the color sampler tool. I'm going to drop down a color point right about here, so kind of like right in the middle of her forehead. And you can see, because I cleared my numbers before, I've got a number 1 that's actually sitting right here, and it's giving me an RGB readout. Nobody uses RGB readouts to do color balancing for skin tone. This is all of this stuff comes from CMYK printers, people who've been doing, again, press work for years. And there's a very specific reason for it, and we'll get into that. So I need these numbers to be CMYK numbers, and you can do that just like we've done when we were changing, remember when we were using our points to establish the tonal range of a channel to create a mask, and the value that always came up was in K, which is again black ink. And we changed it to RGB to get RGB readouts. We're going to do the same thing here. We just want CMYK readouts. So hover over the eyedropper for the little number 1, click on the drop-down menu, and come down to say CMYK color. Now, we have not made this CMYK color. We have simply changed the readout to give us CMYK readouts. This is still an RGB file. You can tell by looking at the file name up at the very top. So this is the trick to this. This is going to be on the board. You'll be able to hear it on the video, but I do need everybody to copy this down. But you need to see it on the board, because this is where the math is. There is a small amount of math involved in this, but if you can multiply, you'll be fine. So the numbers that I'm going to give you hold relatively firm for all skin types. They hold true for Caucasian, for Asian, for African American. There's certain things that will change in this, and we'll talk about what those are, but these ratios, for the most part, function for all skin tone. And so this is what it is. I'm going to put C at the top, M under it, Y under that, and K underneath that. So we're going to talk about Caucasian skin first, and then we'll talk about Asian skin, and then we'll talk about African American skin as well. So the trick to doing this, to doing your color correction, is you need to start with a standard, and the standard is always M. M will always equal M. So M is essentially unchanged. And then we're going to base everything else on M. So C, the value for C should be 1/3 to 1/5 M. Y should equal M all the way up to M plus 50% M. And then for Caucasian skin, 0K. Now, these numbers right here will hold true for African American skin as well. The only thing that changes in this is K. And what happens with K is as you start to increase K, that skin tone gets darker and darker and darker. I mean, we all know this. African American skin can have a radical range from incredibly light to incredibly dark. Basically, that is all controlled by K. And so there is no finite number that I can give you for that part right now, because that really simply depends on the true skin tone. Asian skin falls into this M plus 50% M. This is where that adjustment part is made. So again, there's no definitive rule that I can give you. Some Asian skin tends to cast more yellow than others, so it's not a fixed number, but this is the place to actually begin. These ratios exist for all human skin. So let's figure out what this should really be for her. So when I'm looking at the numbers right now, I've got a 21 for M. So my result, so I'm going to go for my target over here. My result over here, M should equal, didn't I just say that was 20? Okay, so what should Y be? It's the easiest one to figure out. Y should be in a range of 21 to 50% more of that. It's basically 10. So it's a range of 21 to 31. Does that make sense, everyone? Again, 50% of 20, roughly, 21 is 10. So my range for yellow should be 21 to 31. And then my range for C is 1/3 to 1/5 of M. So if I take my 21 and divide it by 3, it's 7. If I divide it by 5, it's 4. So my range for C is somewhere between 4 and 7. Does that make sense to everyone? And then K should be 0 because, again, it's Caucasian skin. Are we good on this part? So then we need to take a look and see where we're at. And you can see in our case right here, my color correction here is perfect. It's falling right in that range. I am that 4 for the C. I am 21 for my M. I am 23, which is exactly the range I want to be in, for my Y, and I'm 0K. So this is skin balanced. If you have problems, though, this thing can pull you out of the sling like you cannot believe. Part of this has to do with I am white balanced, and I'm also got a sensor profile on this thing. So this is how I would finish this image out. Are there questions about this? Are we good? Okay, can everybody find their copy of the castle that we worked on the other day? The assignment that you turned in, assignment 2.4. I need you to find your version of it. And if you don't have a copy of it, I can throw a copy of it up on our server. Does everybody have a copy of it? All right.
We're not saving this file.
No, you are not. In spite of the fact that it's such, you know, it's like there's Avedon, Penn, Engelhard. That was a joke.
Is there a way to make a default for Adobe Photoshop 2021? I have the old one, so every time I open up something, it goes to the old CS6.
Oh, so that when you double click on a file, it opens in 2022 instead of 2021?
No, it opened in CS6,
Oh, a really old one.
a real old one.
Yeah, there is. So here, do this with me. We need to go find a raw file. So go into System 2, go into your student folder, go into the assignment folder, go into any of the ones that are at the top that were the assignment folders, and there can you find just a blank CR2. Got it? Then hit Command, so just select it once, don't double click on it, just select it once. Hit Command I or go up to the File menu and do Get Info. And you will get an info palette that sits, it usually shoots up over to the left-hand side. And down at the very bottom, you will see there's a place where it says Open With. There is a drop-down menu on that, and you want to click on that drop-down and change it from your Adobe, your version CS6 to, you're not done yet, to 2022. And then underneath that, see where it says Change All? You need to click on that Change All because that sets the preference for all of your raw files. Okay. So, oh, the castle. Let me go find mine really quick. So, what's going on?
Photoshop doesn't want to open, but when I go to like my, it says that it's there.
All right, so this is the 2322 version of this.
And then, so it's there.
And when you click on that open, it doesn't open either?
Mm.
All right, let's look at this during the break. We'll get it fixed. We're close. Okay, sorry. Let me find my castle. So if you can go ahead and get the castle, your version open up into Photoshop. That's what I'm looking for. There it is. Okay, everybody got theirs open? Okay, so we need to look at what really went on here. I'm going to turn off, in my case, and everybody pretty much did this, we don't need to really worry about the castle itself right now. I want you to go ahead and turn the castle, the eyeball for the castle just itself. So again, the mask that's only showing just the castle area. What I want to work on is the transition line between the sky and the field, the landscape that's underneath it. If we take a serious look at that mask edge, there's problems in it. And so I want to talk about refining edges in this. Now there's a number of ways of refining edges. This is the method that I'm going to show you guys. It's a little bit older. It's actually hidden now. This is the way it used to happen probably 3 or 4 generations ago. It uses a similar engine to select and mask, but I actually think, and a lot of people are arguing that this is still a far superior engine for it, and it seems a little bit easier to work with and understand what's really going on. So I'm going to select the top layer, the layer that's actually got that mask on it, and I'm going to zoom in. What I want you to do is come into the area where the grass is meeting the sky on the far left side of the picture, and you'll see where we have some of the biggest problem is right here. So if I zoom into this area, you can see that the quick selection tool did a reasonably good job of selecting part of it, but if you'll notice this really dark line that's sitting up along the top indicates that there's a real problem there as well. I'm going to hold down the space bar, and that will temporarily give me the hand, and then I can start to actually drag over and I spot a problem with the castle. So I'm going to zoom in to even more on the castle because this matters that we fix this before we continue on. Now, this may not be for all of you guys, but in my case, you can see that gigantic green line that's sitting right on the edge of on the left edge of the castle. And if you look closer, it's much more subtle, but there's actually a magenta line that's on all the right edges of the castle. So you can spot one really well up here on this little, look at my screen right here. There's a magenta edge on there that is big as life. What is that? Exactly, chromatic aberration. So this tells me that that has not been corrected in this image. So before I start to change my mask, I've got to fix that. Double click on the smart object that's at the very top that is our reprocessed sky, and then zoom down to the optics tab and open that up, and you will notice chromatic aberration was not turned on for that. You need to actually turn it on and say okay. And you go back and it's better, but it's not perfect. And the reason it's not perfect is that you've got that turned on in your other two smart objects. So I'm going to double click the smart object that I'm using for just the castle and also remove chromatic aberration there and say okay. And then finally I'm going to go to the castle in the very bottom layer that we processed just for the grass and remove the chromatic aberration from there and say okay as well. And now when I look at the castle, I have no green line on the one side, no magenta lines on the other side. Again, these are the kind of things that you guys sort of like need to know. But I still have a huge problem, and the huge problem that I've actually got is the what's going on with the grass that's right here. The castle actually looks pretty good to me. As I start to look around the castle, things seem relatively good to me. If I'm looking at the very top, it looks like there's, I don't know, some metal structure frame thing that's on the very top, the highest peak of it. I've got a little bit of haloing that's around that. That's what this like, if you take a look at the very top, you sort of see a lighter area that's sitting up there. I'm pretty sure that's haloing. You get a little bit more of that along the side. So there's a problem with some of that, and that's all in the mask as well. And then I'm going to continue. I'm holding down the space bar to give me the hand. When I get to the trees that are on the other side, I run into that very same problem again. You can see all of the tops of the trees are darker. I've got haloing that's actually happening along there. That's not good. All the way along that. And then finally, when I get to the sort of, I think it's sand, the beach area, whatever, that part actually looks pretty good to me, and I'll show you why that is once we go ahead and refine this. So basically, if I double click on the hand to kick back out, I've got issues with my edge that I need to fix, and this is basically the way you fix it and the way the tool works. This is the technology that all got built into Select and Mask, so I just find this easier to use, easier to control, and I think the results end up being better. So that's what we're going to do. So to do this, I need you to select the very top layer. It's the layer that has the mask on it that's controlling where the sky and the ground meet each other. You need to select the mask. So to do that, click on the mask, make sure that the little white brackets are around the mask. You can see them right there. So it means we're working on this mask. And here's the trick. If we simply come up to the Select menu and come down to Select and Mask, you go into the Select and Mask workspace. This is not what we want to do. So if you have done this, hit the Escape key and it will actually get you back out. Instead, and again, this is a hidden trick. You guys need to write this down because it's on our website. So there's a little note in your assignment folders how to do this if you forget. But just write a note right down there. Hold down your Shift key before you go to the Select menu. When you hold down the Shift key and then go to the Select menu, you still have Select and Mask, but something very different will happen. When you do that, you actually stay inside of Photoshop. We do not go into the Select and Mask workspace, and you get this Refine Mask dialog box that sits over here at the end. Is this what everybody got? Okay, now, has anybody ever used Refine Edge, old days, old school? Because this is the old Refine Edge. And this is what we're going to actually work with on here. Again, I think it does a little bit better job, and it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. So you should still be able to see your layers. You should just have this much smaller little dialog box come up. If you went into the Select and Mask workspace, you're in the wrong spot. So Select and Mask workspace.
So you
Here.
want Shift
You need to click on the mask itself, not the image, and now try it.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. And you're right where you want to be.
So we hit shift and then we click the mask.
No, So hold down the shift key and up to the select menu and down to select and mask.
Gotcha.
And that comes up. Everybody else good on this? Okay, we're going to take a quick tour around here. We're going to get, we'll finish this work by 3 o'clock and jump on to all brand new things. So, how to work with this tool to begin with. We're still actually in the Photoshop workspace, which is nice because things still work and function in the Photoshop workspace. However, the first thing we need to show, we're going to do a quick tour around here just so you understand what's going on here. The first thing we need to do is change the view. So in the view mode up here, so in the Refine Mask dialog, which you can actually move around. So if it's in your way, you can actually move it around, which is a little easier to work with. Anyway, in the View drop-down menu, you actually want to come down to On Layers. And when you click On Layers, so again, View all the way down, there's a version of your view where you can say On Layers. The advantage of working on layers is that any change that we can make, we actually see it happen in real time. So all the changes that I make in here, I can see what it's going to do as it affects my composite. Now, I need to see this area of the grass better. I can't really see it. It's too far away right now. So my keyboard shortcuts for zoom still work. So I'm going to hold down the space bar in the Command or Control if you're on Windows. You temporarily will get the magnifying glass in that area, and we can actually zoom into it because I want to be able to see how to control this part right here. That's basically what I'm looking for. I still have the hand. If you hold down just the space bar, you get the hand so you can move things around a little bit. And what I'm really looking for is I want to see the grass here, and I want to see a little bit of the edge of the castle too. I want to make sure that I understand how those parts are actually working. Now, we will get to radius and show original later in just a second. We're going to go down to edge detection, the next thing. And this is something that's really critical about this tool and the way this tool works. The way the Refine Edge tool works is this. There was a group of high school students who actually invented this tool, which blows me away. Adobe saw it and actually bought the technology from them. But it does one thing. There's an algorithm, which is just a piece of software code that is run on an edge. That's all it does. There's no strength slider. There's no running it a second time. There's no fading it. There's no none of that. It's either on or off. It happens or it doesn't happen. So the trick to using the tool correctly is that you need to tell Photoshop where to run the tool and where not to run the tool. Because if you ran the tool on the entire image, you would obliterate the entire image. It would be looking for refining edges all over your image. That's not what you're looking to do. What you are trying to do is say specifically, run that special piece of software in this spot and do not run it in that spot. Does that make sense, everyone? It's either on or off, light switch, on or off. There is no strength, no opacity, no percentage, no, it's just full-blown yes or full-blown no, nothing else. Again, that's why there's no reason to run it a second time. It's either been done or it isn't. There is no, does that make sense, everybody? I can't stress that enough because people think that they can actually goose this up more and you can't. So anyway, accept it or not. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start with the radius slider right down here. The smart radius, and I always say this to people, smart radius is for stupid people. Don't use it. What smart radius tries to do is exactly the work that we are going to do manually. And if it works, great. 90% of the time it doesn't work, and then you spend even more time trying to fix shit that you never needed to fix to begin with if you just didn't use a smart radius tool. So don't use it. I'm actually going to say take the smart radius slider, and I want you to drag it up to, we get up to around, let's go up to a 10. That'll be a good place for it. So somewhere around 9, 10, somewhere in there. And you can see when we do that, that again, it took care of the problem of the grass that's along the very top. But what I want to show you what's really happened is this. If you go up to the top now and you click on Show Radius, it will show you what is happening. So with Show Radius turned on, this tool understands where the mask is. You can see it's running right along the edge of the mask. It understands that. And when I click on that radius slider, it starts to build out from this. So watch what happens. I want you to, now that you've got Show Radius on, drag your radius slider up to 20 or 30, and you'll see it just gets bigger. It just goes, it understands that the very edge of that mask is meeting where the sky and the ground actually hit each other. As we start to increase the radius, it simply starts to go deeper into the grass and deeper into the sky. If you drag the radius all the way down to 0, you'll see it goes completely black because we are not doing any radius. So if you start to click your radius and drag it up slowly, if I get up around a 2, I've got a very thin line on here. If I come up to 5, it gets bigger. If I come up to a 10, it gets bigger still. That's all this radius thing does. That's all it does. But it does it along the entire line of that mask. The problem is, and again, if we uncheck Show Radius, the problem is it does a really good job on the grass part right here, but look what happens to the castle. If we take a look at the top of the castle, remember I told you there was that sort of like metal thing that's up at the very top? That guy just got pulverized. As a matter of fact, so did all of the sharp corners of the castle. They are all have been knocked off and smoothed off because I've been too aggressive with my radius. If you want to see a before and after, that is the next checkbox at the top of the Refine mask where it has Show Original. If you click on Show Original, it shows you what the image looks like before you use this tool. And you can see it decimates that little iron structure that's on the very top. If you zoom in to the very top of the castle, you'll also notice it rounds off everything that should actually be rounded off up there. It actually ruins all of that part. So I'm at a radius of 30 right now. Far too aggressive. So I'm going to stay on the castle, especially at the top part. This is what I want to look at right here for this radius tool right here. If you double click the hand really quick and you zoom all the way back out, that doesn't work. So again, hold down spacebar command and option, which will give you the negative magnifying glass. You can actually see here with this 30 radius here that it actually has done a weird job around all of this stuff, whatever. So this is not what I'm going to accept in here. I'm going to zoom back into the top of the castle. I'm going to drag the radius slider all the way down. I get the haloing at the very top, and then I'm simply going to slowly take the slider up. I take it up by just increments. I came up to a 1. You can actually use your arrow keys, your up and down arrow keys, to actually tap this in, and it'll go up in tenths. I've got my Show Original is still turned on, so I'm not seeing any change happening. So I'm going to zero my radius out again, uncheck Show Original, and then start to drag this guy up and see basically what's happening. And you can see that when I get to a pixel radius of 1, it actually got rid of the halos. It still leaves that little iron structure on top. It didn't knock off or round off any of the edges. If I do my Show Original back on and off, you can see it does a little rounding off on some of those guys. So I might be able to actually knock this back a little bit more. I'm going to take my radius, I'm going to unshow the original, use my down arrow key, and see if I can come back before I start to get any halos in this. It's starting to halo again. So about a half a pixel for me is actually working out pretty well here. It gets rid of the part that I want to get rid of. That part looks great. However, holding down the space bar and clicking, if you take a look over at the grass on the other side, it's not strong enough for the grass over here on the other side. If you click on Show Radius, you will see why. It's put a really fine little line around the castle, which works perfectly, but the radius is not big enough to actually catch all of the grass that's in that, mask. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? So what I need to do is I actually need to increase the radius but only in the grass area. I don't want to increase it in the castle. I don't want to go back to that. So I can do that using the brush tool right here. This brush tool actually allows you to paint radius in or to remove radius. So I'm going to uncheck the show radius. I'm going to click on the brush. So it's, again, the tool is on the far left-hand side. It's got a little drop-down corner menu to it. You have two options here, either the Refine Radius tool or the Erase Refinement tool. I want you to go ahead and pick the Refine Radius tool. It is a brush. If you bring it out over onto your screen, you can see that it is a brush. I'm going to use the bracket keys just to the right of my P key to make my brush a little bit smaller. You do not want to paint this tool anywhere that you do not need it to be. So do not do some big ass tool like paint tool like this and do a big swatch along all of the edge where the grass is actually meeting the sky. It will fuck everything up. It will screw up the clouds above it. It'll screw up the grass below it. You simply want this tool big enough to paint over the problem area, and you can spot the problem area. It's that really dark grass. So I've got a brush radius. You'll see that you can get a radius size up at the very top in your options panel, one that's about 20 pixels. I'm going to start all the way over on the far right side, far left-hand side, and I'm simply going to click and paint. And as you click and paint, you'll notice something weird. It's like things get darker. Don't worry about that. This is actually by design. It's actually working correctly. Again, what it's showing you where you're actually painting. So I'm painting along this edge. You don't really see it in the sky, but you sure do see it in the ground that's around it. I'm going to come down here and then let go. And you will see it has extended that radius. If you want to see it, click on the show radius again. You will see that I've got a really big area of radius right now here that's covering the transition from the grass to the sky. And I'm going to work my way all the way down till it touches the castle. But I'm not going to paint on the castle at all because I've got the radius slider actually did the castle perfectly. So again, I'm going to uncheck the show radius, and I'm just going to finish painting the grass transition that's sitting up at the top. That part has actually worked out great. If you zip back out, take a look at my screen really quickly. This is what the image looks like. Again, if I show just the radius, there's a big fat area of it on this side over here that's taking care of the grass. Very small area of it, really tight area that's actually around the castle. But now we need to look at what's going on the opposite side of the castle. So I'm going to uncheck show radius here. And I'm going to zoom in to the castle area that's over here on the other side. And you can see I've got that very same problem in those treetops that are over there. I need to make the radius larger because the radius itself was not big enough using the slider to actually get the treetops on the other side. So I'm actually going to paint across the treetops on the other side. Areas that don't need it, like there's a shrub right here or some sort of hedge or top of a tree, that does not need it. I am not going to paint that any larger. I'm simply going to hit the areas that need it. Another problem that a lot of you guys get into is that you think that, oh yeah, I'm just going to paint a quick swatch across all of this. It all needs it. That's not necessarily true. Do not fix anything that is not broken. And I'm finally come over, and now I'm over at the area that's actually where the sand meets the sky. And the problem that I've got now where the sand meets the sky is that there is a very small radius in there, but it's actually created a halo. That's not what I want. If you turn on the show original, you will see that the sort of the shadowing and sculpting sort of indicates dunes that are on the top of that are actually real and the ones that I actually want to keep. But my radius right now that I put on, that little small line radius that I put on around the castle, that half a pixel radius, whatever, is causing this problem. So I need to get rid of the radius on this part, which is the second of the painting tools. So up to the painting tool again on the top left-hand corner, click on the drop-down menu to erase refinements. And in this case, it doesn't really matter how big your tool is because basically we are removing the radius altogether. And I'll show you what it looks like. I'm going to come over to the area where the sand is just meeting the trees, where I just added that part right here. And I'm simply going to click and drag. And you'll notice you get now the opposite. You get this big white line. And if I let go, it actually has now removed that radius. You can do this in real time looking at just the radius itself. So if you turn on show radius, you will see this is what I've just done. I've actually removed that line, and I can do the same thing. I don't even need to look at the image. I know that the whole thing needs to go. So I'm simply going to paint to get rid of all of that. Again, if you want to watch it in real time, you can turn off the show radius part and watch it in real time. And this is what I mean by there is no strength slider in this. This is what's now happened. So if you take a look at my image, come up here really quickly, look at my screen really quickly, you can see that I made a big one on this side to actually get all the grass, a very thin, small one that's around the top of the castle, a pretty heavy one that's right here, but then there was that little tree in the middle that I didn't need it on, so I'm leaving it completely off of that. And then a little bit more that's actually come down here, and this is now how I'm going to actually use the tool. So I'm going to uncheck this show radius. If you want to make sure your work is actually correct, use the show original, line back on and off, and you can actually see the difference that's actually happening with this. This is a great refine. So this part's great. The next part down with all this adjustment edges, do not touch these. There's a better way of doing this after the fact. I don't use these here, I don't use them in the Select and Mask workspace as well. The next part down where it says decontaminate colors, I don't use this either. I do that all manually. We'll talk about that later as well. But in the output setting, this does matter. So if you click on this output, you have options. The first is a selection, and there is no point in saving this as a selection. You actually want to build a mask that's actually going to do this. So in my case, I'm going to select layer mask. Now I've already got one on there. It's just simply going to refine that layer mask, which is great. I'm fine with that. The next thing down, which is new layer, is a problem because what new layer will do is it will actually create a new layer, create a mask for it, and then apply that mask, which again is a destructive measure. We do not want to do that, so you do not ever use new layer. The next one down, new layer with mask. Now that would be an option. If you were really concerned about the one that's sitting down here that you'd done all this work on, blah, 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 then you very easily could say, okay, I want this to actually be a new layer with a layer mask on it. The unfortunate thing about that, though, is that this layer is a smart object, and when it does the new layer, it's going to create a baked layer. It's not going to be a smart object that has your raw data in it. It's going to be just a baked copy of that layer with a new layer mask on it. So an option, but not something I really want. You can create a brand new document. It'll actually create a copy of this entire file and create a new one. Again, unfortunately for this, it's a destructive move because it applies that layer mask, or a new document that's actually got the layer mask intact on it. Fine. Typically, I only use the layer mask to refine the one that's actually there. Never click on Remember Settings. This is for gang stuff. And again, it would be the reason you would have this on, let's say you had been on a tripod and shot 30 images of the same exact background for everything, whatever, then you could actually have the Remember Settings on here. But nobody ever uses this thing, and it eats up a lot of memory, so don't use it. Simply hit OK. And your image has now actually been refined, and you can actually come in and take a look at it, and it looks pretty daggone good. Are there questions about this? Okay, I've got 3 o'clock. Let's do a hard 15. Guys, be back at 3:15, and I'll see you then. And Annalie, let's you and I get you going. Restart your computer really quick first.